First, the president-elect has picked billionaire Scott Bessent to be Treasury Secretary. Now, Bessent is one of Trump's top donors. He is also a former hedge fund manager at a firm started by Democratic megadonor George Soros. But he has since earned Trump world credibility by converting into a MAGA true believer and embracing what the Washington Post calls populist economics. Just a few hours ago, Trump also chose his head of OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, a position of significant influence as far as the president's agenda. In that position, Trump hopes to install the architect of Project 2025, Russell Vought, the man who served the same role during Trump's first term in office. Trump's full embrace of Vought is further confirmation that Trump's proclaimed disinterest in Project 2025 was anything but. And then about an hour and a half ago, Trump made a surprise pick following some heavy lobbying from the Teamsters Union, choosing Republican Congresswoman from Oregon, Lori Chavez DeRemer. She will be his labor secretary. Chavez DeRemer was one of few Republicans to co-sponsor the PRO Act, which protects and strengthens workers' rights to organize. Joining me now to talk this first tranche of appointments is Faz Shakir, senior advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders and founder of the nonprofit More Perfect Union. Faz, thank you for joining me. It has been a flurry of news from Trump world tonight, and I want to kind of just tick through some of these appointments to hear what you have to say. First, let's talk about the Treasury Secretary, just because there was a lot of back and forth about who he was going to pick, whether this was someone Trump could rely on to enact his tariff plan, which has come with a lot of eyebrow raising on the part of a lot of economists. What do you make of someone who was once affiliated with George Soros, once worked for George Soros, played a key role in some of George Soros' investments, now part of the MAGA firmament?
Well, this has been an interesting fight because Elon Musk opposed Scott Bessent. He said he was business as usual and that business as usual would bankrupt the government. It became a major tussle between the Elon Musk wing of the Trump world versus Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, fresh out of jail, advocated strong. This was his major campaign. He had Bessent come on his show. He said, this is the guy. This is the MAGA movement person. He's going to enact our tariffs. And it became kind of so much of a tussle that Trump then looked to a third person, the head of Apollo, Mark Rowan, who was probably the highest profile person who came to Mar-a-Lago, talked to him. And he went with Bessent. So the MAGA world, Steve Bannon wins this one. And you see in the flurry of all these other things, you could see Trump kind of doling out favors to various factions of his coalition tonight. But Steve Bannon got this one.
So a W on the board for Steve Bannon. And I would assume you feel that this is also a W for Steve Bannon in the fact that Justin Vought, a mastermind is the word that's frequently used in the press to describe his work on Project 2025. Mastermind of Project 2025 being installed at OMB. Now, Vought was there in the first term, but it is quite obvious, especially from the writings in Project 2025 that Russ Vought oversaw, that he has some very clear, very extreme ideas about what to do next. What's your reaction to this one?
Well, with that one, Alex, for those who are frequent watchers of the Alex Wagner Show, will remember that 2 nights ago, you and I were talking about the cuts to Medicaid and to food stamps. And that was in the first Trump administration. It happened. Who executed that? When we saw all of those great protests in Capitol Hill over Medicaid cuts, who was the architect? Mr. Russell Vought. He's back, and he's going to be here for the same thing. If you looked at the last budget that Donald Trump produced and sent out in 2020, it had massive cuts. I think it was over $1.5 trillion to Medicaid. It had massive cuts, even cut Social Security, food stamps, of course. And so you can assume, looking both at Project 2025, which, of course, Trump said, oh, no, that's not going to have anything to do with me. Of course it is. And he's now named not only, Vought, but Stephen Miller, Tom Homan, and Brendan Carr, a number of others who were authors of Project 25 to his administration. But you can assume he's going right at all the things you and I were talking about 2 nights ago, Medicaid, food stamps, the far-right agenda to attack working people.
Yeah, just to put a finer point on that, from the Project 2025 stable, he's named Tom Homan, who is Trump's border czar, John Ratcliffe, his planned nominee for CIA director, Brendan Carr, his selection for the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and Pete Hegstra, his selection for ambassador to Canada. Much respect to Canada. The sort of probably most, I'm going to say, unusual pick here and I'm real eager to hear your thoughts on this, is Lori Chavez-DeRemer for Labor Secretary. She had the endorsement of the Teamsters Union. She was at the RNC she had a speaking slot at the RNC this summer, but she endorsed the PRO Act. She has been a friend to Labor. Again, the Teamsters endorsement. I mean, I know you're familiar with this individual. What do you make of Trump's pick for her as Labor Secretary?
Well, it is a pro-labor pick, and this is a victory for Sean O'Brien, the head of the Teamsters, who advocated for, spoke at the RNC, as you mentioned, and went in big for this. And Sean O'Brien got opposed by much of the conservative movement, Competitive Enterprise Institute, Grover Norquist Group, all came out against Sean O'Brien's and DeRemer. And Trump went with them, and I think we all know why. He said, hey, I'm going to do something for my friend Sean O'Brien, which is great in a W, and I hope that we are able to push pro-labor. I mean, the world, the country needs it. However, the hostility that surrounds her is real. You got Elon Musk, you got Russell Vought, we were just talking about. You've got Wall Street hedge fund guy Scott Bessent. These are not people who are ready to go flying with the pro-labor agenda. So she's got her work cut out for her, but it is at least one voice at a table where she is outgunned by very Wall Street friendly people who's going to have at least a labor voice. And there's moments where, of course, I think it could be helpful when workers go on strike. I will just note that, in order to support the labor secretary, you also need an NLRB, National Labor Relations Board support. And so who Donald Trump picks for that needs to complement this direction if we're going to carve into being a pro-labor. But it is a decent first step here.
Yeah, I mean, it's already, first of all, it's Friday night and he's announced 320% of his cabinet in 5 minutes, right? That's chaotic. The actual picks themselves, some of whom we're going to get to a few more in just a second, but the fact that you have a pro-labor candidate at the Department of Labor and Elon Musk advising the president just is all the insight you need to know into how unified this group of people is going to be and the chaos that is bound to ensue with so many people at odds over such key issues.
This week is ending with Donald Trump's first loss as president-elect. His first pick for attorney general dropping out Thursday. That's a key post where Trump had vowed a fight only to drop it. And now it's putting more heat on some other potentially problematic picks that face similar questions. Trump has prioritized the Justice Department more than any other division of government. And he picked firebrand Matt Gaetz, and that was seen as his true desire. He wanted a total warrior, but it was also very clearly this week a test of his power. He didn't consult the senators who have votes on the matter. Trump just acted and basically dared them to oppose him by claiming he might try to ice out their confirmation vote anyway with the recess appointment. And MAGA leaders spent the last week or two saying this was a preview of Trump's second term, an unbridled Trump who would mow down even Republican opposition or just rout around it. And he would dare the Senate or the courts to then stop those recess appointments. In other words, let him get what he wants or he'll go around you anyway. And so here, as we take stock of the world as it really is, how did that go? It failed. Trump lost this first cabinet clash before this new Senate was even sworn in, let alone hearings for some of these nominees. There was a week of the tough headlines about both Trump and Gaetz, and now he ends this week with reports that you see here about the failure, the brutal reality check, that maybe he won't get his way on everything. Now, I can only tell you the facts as we get them. None of that dictates anything about the future of the whole Trump term or this Justice Department. It simply shows that these tests, as they were calling them, are tests for everyone. They work both ways. And that's typical for politics. Trump claimed he was testing the Senate. In fact, the Senate tested him. And it found his resolve to even wage this uphill battle did not extend 2 weeks. And we are working in a field where you need a lot more than weeks of resolve. He couldn't go 2 weeks, let alone the 7 weeks left until the Senate's even, holding these hearings, until Donald Trump is sworn in, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I will tell you, Trump has famously cozied up to many different people in public life, including rapper 50 Cent. Well, we can end the week with this fact. Donald Trump broke the 50 Cent maxim, where he said, quote, "It's easy to see when you look at me. If you look closely, 50 don't back down." Well, Trump do back down. And Washington politicians also know something that has become clear when you put aside the bluster and the spin. Donald Trump's margin of victory that we saw this month is one of the smallest margins in the modern era. If you take the 3 elections he's had, you see them there very simply. Trump's current winning margin, about 1.6%, is far smaller, less than half of Biden's margin in 2020. So what you see there is the Trump win, 1.6, the Trump loss in 20, 4.4, and the margin in 2016 was 2%. In other words, Hillary Clinton had a better margin. She got more total votes than Donald Trump when he won the Electoral College in 16. These facts are driving the stories that are, frankly, more sober than the first few days of the reaction to the comeback of Donald Trump early this month. New York Times has a big piece today that notes the narrow win was the landslide that wasn't. Trump had one of the, quote, smallest margins of victory in the popular vote since the 19th century. So, against that backdrop, Trump has now rushed out his new AG pick, someone he knows better than Matt Gaetz, that is Pam Bondi, and she is an aggressive MAGA ally. She certainly talks tough and has tough political rhetoric. She is different than Gaetz, though. Bondi served as the Attorney General of a big state, just as Kamala Harris did. And so Trump now tapping the Florida former AG, who brings more experience than someone like Gaetz. On paper, as I mentioned when the news broke last night, this is the kind of resume more familiar to presidents in past cycles in both parties. You bring someone who either has a lot of federal DOJ experience, or you bring someone who's risen pretty high in a state or even to the top law enforcement job of a state AG. And this is a big state. There's just more work and more experience there than, say, Idaho. So if you stop there, that's a stride. And for Donald Trump, that would be a positive. Certainly in the eyes of the Senate, a positive compared to the first AG nominee who's now out. But Bondi also went farther than many similarly situated legal officials, especially in her time since leaving office, to echo Donald Trump's language, lies about elections and abusing government power.
We do have evidence of cheating, and I'll talk about that in a minute.
The Department of Justice, the prosecutors will be prosecuted.
We are not going anywhere until they declare that we won Pennsylvania.
The investigators will be investigated.
We've won Pennsylvania. These fake ballots that are coming in late.
Pam, did you just say fake ballots?
There could be. That's the problem.
Even Fox News has to kind of ask at least the follow-up question. Did you say fake ballots? Do you have evidence of that? Are you lying about fake ballots and election fraud? And you heard her sort of measure up there. She went from fake ballots to there could be. That's a quick change to what the actual truth is, and it's my job to fact check it for you. There were no fake ballots or stolen election fraud in Pennsylvania. Indeed, the difference between how some of those Trump allies have sounded and the factual community is we follow the ballots no matter where they lead. So, for example, Trump won Pennsylvania this year, fair and square. You didn't hear as much talk about fake ballots. Bondi was there on the side pushing that misinformation in a cycle where he had lost Pennsylvania. The DOJ clash also reinforces how the Senate can stop other nominees before they even get to hearings, especially if Republicans think those hearings will be a bad thing for the whole party and not just Donald Trump. There are concerns about the largely unvetted intel and defense picks that Trump has made. One Republican already warning against the intel pick based on insufficient support for Ukraine, which will remain a big issue. Republicans are also asking if the Pentagon pick will bring the kind of heat that Gaetz did. Pete Hegseth faces allegations of a 2017 sexual assault. Donald Trump's team says they're blindsided by that sexual assault allegation. The Wall Street Journal reporting that. But I want to tell you something. That's more of an admission than an explanation, because Trump's team is refusing to sign the standard transition agreements or submit its nominees to FBI background checks. That is an extraordinary choice, and one that makes the nomination process riskier politically for the Trump folks, riskier for the Senate to deal with it, but also riskier for potentially the United States. It could leave more top officials subject to blackmail or very big surprises later if you learn these things after they're confirmed, and national security concerns. And the Pentagon pick has a second Gaetz-style problem relating to D.C. relationships. He's attacked some of the Republican senators he now needs to get confirmed.
This is a swamp budget. This is a Mitch McConnell special.
100%.
Lisa Murkowski's been voting with Democrats for a long time, more than she's voted with Republicans. Her and Susan Collins, they can basically have them taking on Mitch McConnell. Until there's new leadership of that Senate conference, it's not going to change. The priorities aren't going to change.
Now, I've told you before, people have every right to share their views, their First Amendment rights, even extreme positions. That's why Pam Bondi could say what she said in public life, which is different than saying that in court, where some of those claims might have been illegal, might have been perjury. Mr. Hegseth, just like Mr. Gates, can clearly express his views of the Senate Republicans. And as I mentioned in my coverage earlier this week, if the only thing were attacking the establishment of either party, well, that's plenty popular around the country for good reason. But you stack all these things up along with this really dangerous choice not to even vet the people going into government. And you have to ask, 2 weeks in, how this small margin pseudo mandate is going.
Now that Donald Trump's first cabinet nominee has flopped, all eyes are on his next most vulnerable candidate, the one we were just discussing, Fox News weekend host Pete Hegseth, who is up to run the United States military. Like former Congressman Matt Gaetz, Hegseth faces a serious accusation of sexual misconduct. According to the Washington Post, Senate Republicans remain open to confirming him. Senators stressed to the Post that police had investigated a 2017 allegation that Hegseth had drugged and sexually assaulted a woman at the California political conference and declined to press charges. Hegseth denies the allegation against him and says the sex was consensual with the woman in question. However, he did pay the woman, quote, an undisclosed sum as part of a non-disclosure agreement for her silence on the matter because he feared his career at Fox News would suffer. Obviously, there's a little history and context over at Fox News with this. And of course, Gaetz and Hegseth are just the tip of the iceberg. As Peter Baker puts it in the New York Times, Donald Trump is defying the Me Too movement with his cabinet picks. And it's worth taking a step back to remember, like, how we got here, how all this began, right? From the moment that he descended the golden escalator at Trump Tower to announce his bid for office, Donald Trump set off a series of earthquakes and reactions in American society. And one of the biggest, the most seismic disruptions he helped to usher in was a new era of rage and accountability around sexual abuse. It tracks back to the month before the 2016 election when we all heard the then Republican nominee bragging about sexual assault on the Access Hollywood tape. And then, shortly thereafter, the avalanche of women is stepping forward to say, oh, yeah, he did exactly the same thing to them. And of course, Trump responded by calling them liars, claiming they were too fat and ugly for him to want to assault. And despite all that, he then beat the first woman presidential nominee of a major party. And millions expressed their fury taking the streets in women's marches across the country the day after the inauguration. And within months, we were in the throes of the Me Too movement as women stood up and spoke out about sexual abuse in all different parts of society. It was, I mean, we were all there, right? You remember? It was enormous change. The fact is that sexual harassment and sexual abuse, sexual assault were essentially open secrets, just known and tolerated across every institution in American life for a very long time. We live with a culture and sometimes even an explicit conspiracy of silence that basically brushed it off and looked the other way. And then this moment came, this seismic moment when women, not just women, men too, said enough. So now 7 years later, Donald Trump is about to return to office. He's going to sweep back into the White House with a movement set on erasing that progress. Trump and his allies want to create a society ordered around the opposite of Me Too. They appear to be seeking out people accused of sexual abuse to elevate them to key positions of power. I mean, they could pick, there's lots of people out there, right? Look who he has chosen for top jobs in addition to Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth. There's, of course, Elon Musk, the co-president, the subject of a sexual harassment lawsuit from 8 former SpaceX employees who say he made sexually inappropriate comments and created a hostile work environment. Musk denies any wrongdoing. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was accused of sexually assaulting his 23-year-old babysitter. Let's just think about that for a second. Your babysitter. And he has not exactly denied that allegation, but said that he is, quote, not a church boy. And of course, at the top of it all, the top of the pyramid is the man accused of sexual misconduct by more than 24 women, which he denies, but also found liable by a jury of his peers after a trial for sexually abusing and subsequently defaming a woman who says he raped her in a department store resting room. Trump claims that is a, quote, made-up, fabricated story. It seems like the goal of the new Trump administration is to put as many men as possible in positions of power who have been accused and investigated, even admitted to sexual misconduct. In other words, the opposite of Me Too. A culture in which men victimizing and abusing and preying on, assaulting, harassing, and raping women, and sometimes men, children, is just not seen as that big of a deal. Like, certainly not seen as disqualifying for higher office. Because the world they want to shape, really, to go back to before Me Too, is one where consent really doesn't mean much. that we just go back to an ethos that says it's fine for powerful men to do whatever they want. Who can really say? This is really like a truly principled belief of theirs. It is not an accident. It's the core of the agenda. But if this is all part of a backlash to both feminism in general and Me Too in particular, then know this. There will be a backlash to the backlash. We don't know what's coming, but spending tons of political capital telling the millions of survivors of sexual assault and harassment to shut the hell up and take it is not going to work. I promise you, they will not shut up and they will not take it. Laura Bassett writes a newsletter on Substack called Nightcap. She's also a contributor for New York Magazine's The Cut, where she writes Trump's cabinet picks are a revenge for Me Too. And she joins me now. How are you?
You know, I'm getting by. I'm putting one foot in front of the other.
I really liked your column. Obviously, I was thinking along similar lines. How do you see, I mean, at some level of like, well, they just have a lot of accused predators in their circle, so it's not an ideological project, but it does, I don't know, it does feel like they're saying something here.
It does. I think Trump deliberately is surrounding himself with other men who have been accused. Look, Trump's a vengeful guy, right? And if you recall, when he first got elected, he said the first thing I'm going to do as president back in 2016 is to sue all the women who accused me of sexual assault. So we know that he wants his piece of flesh or whatever. He wants his pound of flesh. And he never ended up suing those women. And then things got worse for him. You know, Stormy Daniels won against, basically took him down in court. Right. E. Jean Carroll won 2 defamation trials against him, not just once, but twice. And now he's been reelected. And so this time he's surrounding himself with other men who have been accused so that he can send a message that, you know, what we're not afraid of is rape. What we are afraid of is men losing their careers to these accusations.
It's been very interesting to me to watch the sort of the Hegseth stuff. And again, I want to be clear. He denies this. He says there was a consensual sexual encounter in which a woman who had gone to the hotel with her husband and children at a conservative women's conference consensually slept with him and then fabricated an allegation. But what I think is interesting here is the defense is, well, the police looked into it, which they did. There's a police report and chose not to bring charges.
Yeah.
And I feel like one of the defining things we learned in Me Too was that just because the police don't arrest someone for a sexual assault does not therefore mean a sexual assault did not happen.
Right. I mean, then the entire point of the Me Too movement is that powerful men have gotten away with being serial rapists for years. I mean, if you look at the Hegseth report, at the actual police report, which I recommend that everyone does, the details are nauseating. I mean, she says he took her phone away, that she said no multiple times, that he blocked her from getting out of the hotel room. She went to the ER and did a rape kit. She reported it to the police. This woman did everything right. And the fact that the police didn't pursue it, I mean, since when are the police, you know, so great at dealing with rape in the first place? So it's amazing to me that, you know, are we even trying anymore?
Well, that is the thing, right? Because I think what happened with my read on this, and I'm curious what you think, is that we had this moment of real sort of like fervor.
Yeah.
And a long overdue reckoning.
Right.
And then there was like, you started to feel this sort of like backlash brewing. And I don't want to minimize, like there are tough calls and areas of real nuance about accountability, redemption, also like how you do actually get to the bottom of difficult, factual, contested questions that aren't a trial. Like there are real, actual nuanced things. Then that became like the full backlash.
Right.
Which is just like what we're seeing here.
Exactly. I think part of the problem was that the mantra sort of believe women, which is sort of trying to correct from women never being believed, was turned into believe all women, which conservatives took to mean that a woman can just open her mouth and say anything, and we automatically believe her. And that was never what the Me Too movement was seeking, and that's never what progressives were saying. But I think that sort of, I felt the sea change start with Christine Blasey Ford, and she gave that incredibly powerful testimony, and half the country just said, we don't believe you, or we don't care. And you know, now we have little boys chanting at girls in classrooms, your body, my choice. I mean, you can Google it. This is
I know that. I mean, I think the reason that my eyes got wide there is that I just feel like I'm watching them shoving gunpowder into the crevices of something, which is like this idea that you're sort of leaning into this kind of like chauvinist vision of male domination, which I think is a very like poor and and sort of sad and cramped and actually kind of pathetic vision
Agreed.
of masculinity, personally. But the idea that you're just going to do that and like there's not going to be a
response
going to
lie
it.
back.
Like, I just feel like if you didn't like the first Me Too fervor, I don't think you're doing a great job right now of avoiding something like that.
Exactly. Exactly. The next one's going to be bigger. I mean, the first time I remember the sort of power, and now it hasn't aged that well. We look back on the Women's March and the pink knitted pussy hats, and everyone kind of thinks that was silly. But I remember at the time feeling the power of the collective. Women's rage. They were marching and they were angry and they were getting tattoos and and it worked. They put some really powerful men in jail who wouldn't otherwise have ever been held accountable. The pendulum swings, and the pendulum has swung this way. We're at the apex of the backlash. And when it swings the other way, it's going to be so much worse for these men and for the women who enable them.
Do you think it matters? Again, this is it's insider baseball because it's about who's going to be the attorney general.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just felt the Gates thing mattered.
Yeah.
It just is it's just too much.
You think it was a good sign that he had to pull out?
Yeah, I think it's for complicated reasons. He's loathed by fellow Republicans, whatever. But I think I think it was important that he didn't.
I mean, I'm certainly glad he didn't go through. I think that he has sort of been a lightning rod for all the attention,
right.
And so it's helping these other men get through.
Even
Linda McMahon. I mean, it's like half the cabinet at this point.
Yes, we should Linda McMahon, so people don't know, she's been accused in a recent lawsuit of failing to stop a ringside announcer for World Wrestling Entertainment from grooming and sexually abusing children in the 80s and 90s. This is a long pattern alleged in this lawsuit. They say they did not know about it. Laura Bassett, thanks for coming on.
Donald Trump has announced a new attorney general pick. The name is Pam Bondi. Bondi served as the state attorney general in Florida from 2011 to 2019. Before that, she spent more than 18 years as a prosecutor, currently a partner at a lobbying firm. Bondi has long ties with the president-elect. Back in 2016, on the eve of the Republican primary in Florida, Bondi endorsed Trump, picking him over the candidate from her own state, Senator Marco Rubio. 59-year-old later joined Trump's legal team defending the then president in his first impeachment trial. When Trump's first attorney general, Jeff Sessions, was ousted in 2018, Bondi's name was floated then as a possible replacement. In a statement announcing his new AG pick, President-elect Trump called Bondi an America First fighter, saying she will, quote, refocus the DOJ to its intended purpose of fighting crime and making America safe again.
And Willie, very interesting. Dave Ehrenberg, of course, right now, Palm Beach County's state attorney, ran against Pam Bondi in 2010 for state attorney general in Florida. And we're going to have him later on in the show to talk about the new AG pick.
Yeah, and we'll have more on who she is and what she might bring to the job if she's confirmed in just a minute. But Pam Bondi's name came about very quickly yesterday because Matt Gaetz withdrew his name from consideration for Attorney General. Gaetz explained his decision, writing on social media, "It is clear that my confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition." Gaetz, of course, embroiled in his own scandals, facing allegations of sexual misconduct and illicit drug use. The former congressman denies those claims. Sources tell NBC News at least 5 Senate Republicans were planning to vote against Gaetz and had communicated to other senators and those close to Trump they are unlikely to be swayed on Gaetz. At least 20 senators were uncomfortable with having to vote for Gaetz for Attorney General. The former congressman could only afford, of course, to lose the support of 3 Republicans to be confirmed, assuming no Democrats would have voted for him. So what happened here? Joining us now, congressional reporter for The Hill, Michael Schnell, NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian as well. Good morning to you both. Michael, let me start with you and how this fell apart so quickly. We had heard privately and then publicly from some senators in the last 24 hours or so that they just couldn't get to yes on Matt Gaetz, that this was the one perhaps nominee that they were willing to take down. So how did this happen in the end, and why did he walk away?
Yeah, well, Willie, we know that, excuse me, former Congressman Matt Gaetz was on Capitol Hill 2 days ago, the day before he dropped out. He withdrew his name from consideration. And he had these meetings with senators. And senators seem to be keeping an open mind, saying that the president-elect deserved to pick who he wants in these positions and let them have their say and defend their nomination. But we were also hearing from those same senators that they wanted to see the ethics report into Matt Gaetz. They wanted to see the allegations and the information that had been gathered over roughly 3.5 years by the House Ethics Committee. Now, the panel had been debating and weighing whether or not to release that report. This week, they declined to release the report. The vote to release the report had failed. But I spoke to a source familiar with the situation who told me that members left that meeting with the understanding that the report would be, quote, ready by the time of their next meeting on December 5th, indicating that another vote could potentially happen then and a vote could be successful on releasing this report. So I think that with the skepticism among senators, having this real possibility of an ethics report coming out, whether it be through a formal vote of a committee, whether it be through a leak from the committee, or right now, there are even House Democrats who are pushing to have a floor vote on forcing this ethics committee to release its report into Matt Gaetz. There seemed to be this concern that at the end of the day, he wasn't going to be able to wrangle enough votes, that his confirmation hearing would potentially be a spectacle on the Senate side. There were some senators saying that it would be Kavanaugh on steroids, of course, referring to that that confirmation hearing for Brett Kavanaugh that grabbed a lot of headlines. So at the end of the day, it's clear that the Trump campaign, the Trump transition team and former Congressman Matt Gaetz decided that it wouldn't be worth putting him through the next few weeks of this confirmation process, having these incessant headlines. Instead, have him step aside and put somebody else up for the job.
And now questions about what happens to Matt Gaetz. Does he go back to his congressional seat? Was he promised something by President Trump to step aside, like perhaps filling the Senate seat in Florida that will be vacated by Marco Rubio? We'll see in time. So, Ken, let's look at the new choice from Donald Trump. Pam Bondi, Attorney General in the state of Florida, the first female Attorney General in that state. A defender of Donald Trump during impeachment, both as an attorney and on television. What else do we know about her and how justice is feeling about this choice?
Well, one reaction I got from inside the Justice Department last night was this is Matt Gaetz with a better legal resume. But the legal resume is significant, Willie and guys, because Pam Bondi was a career prosecutor down there in Hillsborough County for many, many years before she was elected Florida's first female attorney general. So she's prosecuted major cases, murders, death penalty cases. She understands how that works. Matt Gaetz had never really been much of a lawyer before he was elected to the Florida legislature. So that's a big difference. And, you know, she, at the same time, though, she is, you know, an extreme MAGA activist and has tainted her legal career with very strong stands in favor of some questionable things. There was a famous incident back in around 10 years ago when, if you remember, Trump University, that for-profit university that Donald Trump ran, was getting a lot of consumer complaints about being a scam, and her office was asked to join a multi-state lawsuit, and Donald Trump's foundation contributed $25,000 to her campaign, and she opted not to join that lawsuit. And his foundation was later fined for making an illegal contribution. So, look, she served her tenure, 8 years as Florida Attorney General. She later went on to be one of Donald Trump's impeachment defense lawyers in the Ukraine impeachment in 2020, made a speech on the House floor during the trial, arguing that there was a Biden corruption scandal in Ukraine and that's why that phone call was okay. And she's also raised questions about fraud in the 2020 election, which people think were baseless. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but people are breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief at the Justice Department that at least she's a real lawyer and that her deputy, Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's defense attorney, does have a lot of experience at the Justice Department and is also well regarded over there. So net, people are thinking this is a much better situation than Matt Gaetz, but she is certainly a Donald Trump loyalist who has also raised questions about weaponization at the Justice Department and may really cause some trouble over there from the perspective of some of the career folks, guys.
All right, NBC's Ken Dilanian, thanks so much. Rev, let's look at the headline. Obviously, yesterday, we had been saying on this show that it's like the old Midas commercials about when the ethics report and all the bad information came out on Matt Gaetz. You can either pay us now or you can pay us later. And the later it is, the closer it is to, the more that it's actually in the middle of the new presidency. And I think that's the last thing they obviously, they didn't want to see this scandal in the Senate probably in January and February.
Absolutely. I think it was the wise thing for the Trump people and for President-elect Trump to withdraw him now because a long-term spectacle of days and weeks would only damage them even more. Take your losses short. Let him walk away because he was never qualified. Yeah. And he could not give any reasonable argument as to why he'd be Attorney General. I talked to people that I know in Florida last night that are on the civil rights side. We have a chapter in the National Action Network there. Mm-hmm. Bondi is certainly on the right, but she is one who's qualified to become Attorney General in terms of she's handled cases, she's managed offices. And yes, we can raise questions about what she did with Trump University, but there's no glaring things in terms of her values and morals. You're talking about Gaetz with underage sex. You're talking about money that has been documented that was sent around. And to put him in charge of the Justice Department made a mockery of the system. So I think it was better for Trump. Not that I'm a Trump person at all, but it was better for him and certainly better for the American public to get Gaetz off the scene as soon as possible.
Right, and one of the things that Dave Ehrenberg said was he ran against her, ran a tough campaign in 2010. He's coming on later and said right after she defeated him, she hired him and actually spoke out to Republicans who didn't like it, saying, she's good. He's good at what he does. We need him in our department.
Which shows maturity, which Gaetz certainly
Didn't
lacked.
show, yeah.